Living Life Juicy podcast. Conversations with interesting people you should know. Welcome to Living Life Juicy, the podcast where we explore what it means to be present and kind as we do great things. I'm your host and guide, John Losey. And if you're interested in video resources and insights on how people learn and grow and how groups develop, you can go to the Growing People podcast and YouTube channel. I'm with the Into Wisdom group. You can check out that at intowisdomgroup.com. And be sure to like, comment, do all that kind of stuff. Also, we started a Patreon. If you are interested in supporting professional development for everybody, go to my Patreon at John Losey. I think it's John Losey GPG or something like that. But what that does, if you want to support that, we put resources up there, and you can just take them, or if you believe in it and want to support it, you can become a Patreon on that. So that's that. But today, we're talking with a guy I met over 15 years ago. And I met him at a Challenge Course conference. His name is Scott Gurst. Scott was leading a session on Simon Says that blew everybody away. It was only later I learned that he is an actual rocket scientist. His work is currently orbiting the Earth, Mars, and soon Jupiter. I'm excited to learn more about his story and his journey to get there. This spans a universe from leading children's games for adults on Earth to the outer limits of our solar system. So, Scott, welcome.
Thanks, John. I feel like I've arrived.
You're here.
Everything I've done in my life up till now has led me to this right here, this moment right here.
Hopefully this can be the intermediate step to something even more amazing that has nothing to do with Simon Says or orbiting satellites. Who knows what's going to come next?
Thanks. I'll try to be interesting. I'm assuming in post-production you can make me sound interesting even if I'm not. So.
Oh, it's what we do. It's
yeah, okay.
It's with AI you can do anything.
Great.
But what I want to do is start off by just allowing you to explain what you do. And the way I do that is just ask, how do you, like if you're at a cocktail party or you're in a group of people and say, oh, Scott, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
I wouldn't have time at the typical cocktail party, but I guess it's a long explanation, but I guess the big summary, the overall arching theme seems to be technical work and people work. And those two things don't necessarily seem like they always go together. But I feel like I've been fortunate enough to find a blend of those that works really well for me. And everything that I have done has been bouncing back and forth between technical work and people work, sometimes doing both at the same time. When I'm doing technical work, I miss the people work. And when I'm doing people work, I miss the technical work. And sometimes I have managed to find ways to overlap them. And I'm actually at a point in my life now where I feel really blessed to be able to have a foot in both worlds and be able to do both kinds of work. And both of them give me joy.
So tell me a little bit because that's got to follow up a question of what do you mean by technical work?
So technical work would be, I got a degree in electrical engineering. I was always good in math and science as a kid. I went to a place called Lehigh University and graduated with a degree in electrical engineering. And over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to hold a variety of different jobs, some of them somewhat tedious and boring. And most recently, for the last 20 years, working here at the University of Colorado in the aerospace department at the Laboratory for Atmospheric and Space Physics. As you've mentioned, I've been fortunate enough to work on a variety of projects, some of which are currently orbiting Earth, some of which are orbiting Mars. And in October, hopefully, one of our projects will be on the way to Jupiter. And we basically design high precision instruments that get mounted on satellites, and mostly for our friends at NASA, and sent out to measure whatever the scientists are interested in measuring.
So I'm laughing because when you describe that, it reminds me of the Howard Wolowitz character on Big Bang Theory, if you've ever seen that.
I'm familiar, yeah.
You make the stuff that actually has to get stuff done out in space. It's like it's got to work.
Yes, it has to work. And it's interesting when we talk about the technical work. I worked at a lot of companies early in my career. The first one was doing stuff for the military, which was not very exciting, and didn't. It was actually kind of depressing almost. Um, and so I was fortunate enough to work my way into jobs that were more in doing stuff for telecommunications, but we were primarily making stuff. We were making tape drives and routers and things like that, where we were making thousands of them, and they were commercial products. And the philosophy in the commercial electronics business was always, as when we're making these things, uh, the philosophy was it doesn't matter if they work, because we have to beat our competition to the market. And so if it doesn't work 100%, we're still going to send it out. We can always fix it later or patch it or send an update. But we were on a schedule because we had to get these things out before our competition if we wanted to make money. Um, and there was something about that that rubbed me the wrong way, because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and the idea of working on something and sending it out before it's done, um, didn't sit with me very well. This job that I have right now, which I was fortunate enough to get, is somewhat the opposite. We're making things that have never been made before, in general, um, and we're making one of them, and then we're putting them on a satellite and we're sending them out into space. And when you do that, you can't send a repairman out to fix it. So it has to be right. It has to work. It has to not fail, because our failures in the space business are very public and very expensive, and in the worst case scenario, can actually cost people their lives, and have in the past. And
So I'm
luckily,
curious about, you said something interesting there. You're making things that have never been made before. How do you know when you're done?
how we know when we're done is it successfully does the things that the scientists ask us to have them do. And that comes with a lot of testing down here on Earth before we ever send anything out into space.
I bet you have to be really, really clear in asking, what they need it to do. I mean, that's gotta, because I know so in like, well, I want to get into the people part later, but a lot of what I do, people come in and say, we want to do this, and it's really vague, and like, we want to do team building, or I want to be a better communicator, or whatever. And you've really got to sit down and say, okay, what does success look like? If it's really working,
Yeah.
give me a checklist that tells me it does this, 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 and this to this extent.
Yeah, and we get those lists from the scientists. It's one of the first things that happens in any project is the scientists will say to us, we need something that measures this and does this, this, and this. And it's very clear, like it's not, we want to measure particles that are being ejected from underneath the ice crust of Europa. They'll tell us how many particles per minute they need and exactly what particles they're looking for. And so we get a very, very detailed list of requirements flowed down to us, and we are held accountable to those throughout the duration of projects, which can last anywhere from 2 to 4 years, from start to finish, and then maybe another 2 years to the time when it actually gets launched. But all along the way, we are testing to those very specific set of requirements. And so it's either a yes, it does it, or no, it doesn't. There's no vagueness in there.
Yeah, I know that there's a lot of business people that would wish they had that kind of order for them.
There's a lot of clarity in this business for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So now let's switch to the other side. You also said your technical stuff, but what about the people stuff? What's that?
It's been a interesting variety, and most of that stems from summer camp. A lot of the person who I am comes from experience at summer camp. My parents were both public school teachers, and when I was 6, they decided they wanted to send myself and my sister to camp, but they couldn't afford it because they were public school teachers. And so they made a deal with the guy who owned a summer camp that they would go work for him in exchange for allowing their kids to attend camp for free. And this was a full 8-week summer camp. This wasn't like a 1 week or a 2 week thing. This was school ends 3 or 4 days later, you're on the bus, drop the kids off, and they're there for 8 weeks, and you go home at the end of the summer and you have about 3 or 4 days before school starts. And there was one visiting day in the middle of summer. So this was the real deal. This was kids, you're on your own. And even though my parents were working there, they did a really good job of creating a definite, separation, which will benefited, us as well as them. And a lot of my, experiences that sort of formed who I am came from being at summer camp. Some of my best friends still to this day are people I met at summer camp.
Yeah, I grew up going to camps. I went to week-long camps. So I usually go to 1 or 2 weeks throughout the summer. And then when I was in high school, I went to a camp called Blue Helmets that was uh, physical, spiritual, emotional discipline.
Mhm.
And like, so running and lifting weights and doing work and all that kind of stuff. And that was that extended camp. We did that. That was a long summer. But I had the chance to work at long-term camps like what you went to.
Yep.
What do you think is like you said is camp formed me in a lot of ways. What were some of the experiences that formed you that you think were impactful uh happened because of camp?
As a kid, there's a lot of growing up that happens, right? And I always tell people that, um, I think it teaches a lot of independence, especially for kids who are maybe a little too dependent on their parents or other way around. Is at a camp, when you get dropped off at camp, if you don't make your bed doesn't get made. If you don't fold your clothes don't get made. If you don't brush your teeth, your breath stinks, right? And you have to figure all that stuff out. Probably more importantly than learning how to play baseball or ride a horse or
Yeah.
do archery or whatever is learning how to have relationships with your peers without having your parents have to come rescue you, right? And so, there was a lot of that. But I also, had the privilege and pleasure of, because my parents worked there, of continuing long after I was a camper, to become a staff person there. And then eventually my parents went on to actually purchase the camp, and they were owners of the camp for several years. They they started going there in 1967, and this summer my nephew is working there, and so that will make, I think, 58 consecutive summers that somebody from my family will be at that particular summer camp. So it sort of infused a lot of what I did, and I actually had the opportunity as an adult to go back there and run the ropes course program at that summer camp and learn a little bit of the hard skills as well as the facilitation stuff.
Yeah.
My dad didn't know what a ropes course was, but all the other camps were getting them. And so he had somebody come in, a company called Cradle Rock came in and built our ropes course for us, really beautiful ropes course. And he said, "Do you want to run the ropes course program?" And I said,
What
"Sure."
what the heck? Yeah. I got to tell you, the week-long camp that I went to the very first year, I was in like fourth grade, third or fourth grade. And because it was only a week long, I came back. My parents unzipped my suitcase and saw that I hadn't taken any clothes out of it. That's what the lessons that you're talking about. I definitely learned a little bit more social care in future camps.
Mhm.
But yeah, I that that history of working and going to a camp and then working at that camp, that's huge. And I think that if you go back, I interviewed somebody, movie producer named Jill Colton, who did Abominable, worked for Pixar, worked on like Toy Stories and all that kind of stuff. She and I met working at camps. And she talks about how working at a camp really helped her understand how to direct and produce movies. So, man, camp applies to everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, specific things, what you said that you work right now. What do? You do technical work and people work. What kind of people work are you doing that sprung from working at camps?
Um, well, I'm currently coaching, so I've been doing a lot of coaching. I coach a mountain bike training group, a group of about 40 people who are training for races, usually in the 50-mile range. And actually, our first workout is this coming Tuesday. And this will be our 11th season. And this group formed out of my head. It didn't exist before. And I had the opportunity to present a proposal to the Boulder Mountain Bike Alliance back in 2014 for this thing that, I had sort of cooked up in my head, which was a combination of mountain bike training and summer camp, basically. Is that we train very hard and we do workouts, but we do them together. And so there's a communal aspect of training behind it. And it takes away some of the drudgery that people associate with training. And it's fun to work out, but it's more fun for me to work out with a group. And we do these long rides on weekends that are primarily, we're just trying to get miles in. And so, we just pick some beautiful route to go up in the mountains, and we'll have 20 or 25 people just doing this really beautiful ride up in the mountains and doing it together, which is a lot of fun. So it's training, but it's community as well. And so and a lot of that again comes from this, experience at summer camp, which is, things are fun to do, but in general, for most people, they're fun to do when you're doing them with other people who you have similar interests to, right?
Yeah, especially when it gets tough, when you're slogging up a hill and you've got
Exactly.
the people around you pulling you forward.
Exactly. There's an accountability piece to it, but there's also a motivational piece to it as well. And I've been blessed as a coach to see a lot of what I call it ordinary people doing extraordinary things that maybe they didn't think they were capable of doing because they had the, guidance of a coach and the support of a group of friends. Yeah.
Well,
So
I
that's
think it's so important that people hear, and this goes for business coaching and all that other stuff. First of all, it makes sense. What you do is what people connect with coaching. But now, like in the business world, you swing a cat, you can't help but hit a coach or a consultant, life coach, physical, whatever it is. But having that clarity about, all right, I am helping you become more than you thought you could.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why Olympic athletes, best athletes in the world, all have coaches. Because of exactly what you talk about. It's about not only learning the competencies, but moving forward with collaboration and accountability.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, so that's how I get my people fix. But also, I've been doing the Simon Says thing as, that's sort of
Yeah.
how we came to know each other, which is entirely bizarre, and I have no idea how it got to where it is right now. Just complete. I mean, it was a lucky accident that I happened to be in the right place at the right time with that, and um, it's turned into something really, really fun, and a unique skill that I seem to have, and I don't know why I have it, but I do.
Yeah. Well, let me do this. Just since you brought it up, I'm going to share my screen. And this is from the very first time. Oops, I'm showing the wrong one again. This is like, I think that maybe the first or second time that we met. And I had a really big video camera then. And I just captured this and then put some graphics over it.
This is hands down.
Now look how young we are.
Clapping position. The clapping position is actually very important. When I ask you to go to the clapping position, I really want you to, like you're drawing six shooters, like get there. Not lazy, but right like this, like you're ready to applaud at any minute. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? Now's the time. Okay. Then the game has officially begun. All right, everybody put your hands up, but not yet.
So what's interesting, a couple of things about that. First of all, I just saw you lead this about a month ago. And same beginning, very similar rules. You've added a few things.
Yep.
The other piece is that the titles that I have on there are taken from a workshop I went to of yours, where you were explaining how to lead Simon Says. And the what I walked away with was amazing notes that looked like that they came from a rocket scientist, like an engineer.
Yeah.
So the question I have, how does your people work and your technical work overlap? How do you integrate those things?
Excellent question. And I think in sort of going through this, my history in preparation for this, it has occurred to me over and over again that these two things, which some people would say right brain, left brain, the technical piece and the people piece, are not mutually exclusive. And as a matter of fact, for me, they complement each other so that I can, as you say, do, work in this space where I'm coaching people and have the people skills to be able to coach them, but also the technical skills to be able to put together a training program and organize it in such a way that it's the most effective. It sort of enables me to pull from both of my, areas where I feel like I have some skills. And the overlap actually helps rather than it's not like they're in conflict with each other. And, when I was, how I came to the Simon Says thing was, from our mutual friend, Tom Leahy. I actually was unemployed for about almost 2 years back when the tech bubble burst in about 2003. I'd been working for a couple startups that failed. And then for a long period of time, there was no engineering work. And during that period of time, I started reaching out to people in the experiential education field because I had, some background in that, thinking maybe I could find some work there. And I ran into, a gentleman named Tom Leahy, and talked with him for a while. And he said, "Hey, do you want to come build a ropes course with me in Arkansas?" And I said, "Yes." What a great opportunity. And the next week I was on a plane to Arkansas. Of course, this was August, and working outside in Arkansas in August wasn't, I mean, it was challenging. It's about 100 degrees and high humidity. But we actually had a good time. And after we were done, he said to me, "Hey, I have this conference that I run every year. It's a National Challenge Course Practitioner Symposium. Would you like to come? You can meet a lot of people in the business and maybe find some work." And I said, "Sure." And so I showed up at the conference in February. And as you know, it's unlike any other conference, certainly not like any engineering conference in the world. And I think one of the things that's fascinating about that conference, I think he bases it on the concept of open space. And essentially what that means is you can show up as a participant and unexpectedly wind up leading something at the conference. And the first night of the conference is Thursday night. They do what's called stay and play. And so everybody just sort of gathers, and it's a chance for facilitators to play their favorite games for the other facilitators to help, it's like maybe people learn some new games or learn some twists on some games. And so I showed up with no intention of leading anything. And write on there's a piece of paper and everybody writes what game they want to lead. And people are writing things on the board and they're, starting to lead games. And for some reason, I had this strange thought, like maybe I can lead Simon Says. Now, it's kind of weird. Like I don't know why I had that thought. Simon Says isn't a new game. It's not a game that, like you put Simon Says on the sheet and people will say, "Well, that's like I've played Simon Says a million times before. What's so special about that?" But I had a couple of twists on it. And one of which, as you know, is that, the way I play the game is nobody's ever out. So most people, when they play Simon Says, you make a mistake, you're out, which makes no sense whatsoever because it's not fun to be out. And being out, you don't get a chance to learn anything and get better at it. So there was that. But the second part was that I was actually good at it. And I hadn't done it in a really long time, but I had done it at summer camp many, many years earlier. And my game was based on, I don't know, do you remember a show called Battle of the Network Stars?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was essentially get these people together from the various networks and they compete against ABC and NBC and CBS would compete against each other. It was, Farrah Fawcett Majors and Gavin McLeod, just all these people from these various shows, and they would play games against each other. And one of the games was Simon Says, and it was run by a gentleman named Lou Goldstein, who was a guy who worked at a resort called Grossinger's in upstate New York. And these were sort of these resorts in the Catskills that, people would go to in the summertime, predominantly Jewish families would go to in the summertime and they'd stay for a week or two. And if you watch the movie Dirty Dancing, you sort of get that's kind of what it was. And Lou Goldstein was called a tumbler, which is a Yiddish word that roughly translates to cause a frenzy. And each of these resorts had a tumbler, and it was just a guy who was responsible for making sure everybody had a good time. They led games, they entertained, they told jokes. I mean, they were sort of actually the old school version of facilitators, what facilitators
Yeah,
are.
we had a guy at our camp we called Mr. Fun, and that was his job title. I mean,
Exactly, Mr. Fun. And so Lou Goldstein was the leader of these Simon Says games on Battle of the Network Stars. And he was so good. And he was really good at getting people out. And he was really good at making people look silly, which was his job. His job was to, take these people who are these like famous TV stars and make them look silly. And that's how we got our entertainment. And so I remembered some of the way that Lou had run his games, and I patterned myself off of that with one major exception, which was, in addition to the not being out, when Lou played, his goal was to get people out. Like he was confrontational. My goal was to be empathetic, right? To give the impression that I'm in this with you. We're all on the same team, and my goal is to try to get you better at playing Simon Says. And so it was a different twist on it, but for some reason I thought it would work, and I just got up in front of everybody, and it worked.
Yeah. What I'm curious, what do you think makes you such a good Simon Says leader?
I think it's the combination of the right brain, left brain piece, right? Is that I put a lot of thought into how it's organized, right? So I plan it out as an engineer would. But I think when I get up
Yes,
and
you do.
but when I get up and lead the game, it's my people skills take over. And so I can sort of it is really the perfect balance of the two, which is as I'm leading the game, I'm using my technical skills to organize the game in my head, but I'm using my people skills to keep people involved and positive, and um, it just works for whatever reason. And as you know, I've turned it into a multi-$100 business.
Of course. Yeah. And everybody out there, if you haven't experienced Scott, bring them into your organization. And now you're known to the dozens of my listeners.
Yes. And
Yeah.
it's, I love doing it. It's so much fun, and it's so gratifying. And it's been great to see the way it's grown. I've had the opportunity to teach a lot of people at the same conference every year how to lead Simon Says, and they've gone off to their groups and use that. But it's provided me a lot of great lessons as well. And it's amazing to me how much it overlaps with the electrical engineering, or the space piece, which is, Simon Says is a lot about how to learn how to make mistakes and continue to move forward. And in my job every day here, I make mistakes every day. The process of developing these high-tech instruments, many of which have never been made before, involves a lot of mistakes and false steps. But we eventually wind up to the point where we have an instrument that we know will not fail. But that process is a long, long process. It can take up to 4 years. And Simon Says it's a relatively trivial task. I bet if I played with you for 2 hours, I wouldn't be able to get you anymore. But the good thing about that is it shows in a very short period of time, in about a 15 or 20-minute interval, how the learning process works, and how people can go from feeling like I'm never going to be able to get this to, hey, I think I got this, right?
Yeah. From
So,
watching you do it, a couple of observations. First of all, I think that if people just watch you, they would never think in terms of the engineering behind it. It's just you up there doing it great. And there's a lot of facilitators out there that think, oh, that's what it should be. You shouldn't have to work so hard at it. You shouldn't have to think about it. It just happens, the facilitator magic. But you take a step back, and from watching and learning from you how this works, yes, you have an amazingly detailed approach and strategy behind your sequences. And I think facilitators need to know the intentionality at which you put together you've scaffolded, to use some facilitator jargon. Basically, you start off simple, and then each time you do a step out and catch a bunch of people doing that, you go in and now you build on the skill sets, and then you step out and you build again. And it's fascinating for me to step back, now observe you leading it and knowing the intentionality behind it, and watching everybody both fall for it and get it.
right.
I think that understanding, I think every facilitator should learn from you and from this, the intentionality that can happen. Facilitation isn't magic, but it is the freedom for people to move around and to fail and to learn.
Right.
So that's one observation. I think I've used it to teach emotional intelligence, because the importance of stopping for both judgment and emotional intelligence, you need to pause. And even if it's just a moment for you to register, did he say Simon or not? And you see that in people as they start to get it, there's a momentary pause, almost imperceptive, when they're just going, did he say Simon? And that's it, based around really complex motions. So I really enjoy watching you do that. And I like the fact that we're tying your technical rocket science, electrical engineering stuff into a children's games for adults.
Right.
Weaving that together is just great.
And it goes a lot to, I use it a lot with my my bike groups. to talk about focus, right? Is that, when you're doing a 50-mile race or a 50-mile bike ride, you got a lot of time to think. And unfortunately, a lot of people left to their own devices will engage in a lot of negative thinking and negative self-talk. And staying focused on the task at hand, which is relatively simple, it's pretty much turn the pedals, drink, eat, relax. And there's really not much more than that. But the internal dialogue that goes on can sometimes be very, very self-defeating. And so the kind of focus that's required in Simon Says, it's actually a very, very simple game if you think about it, is you listen for the word Simon says, you wait to the end of the sentence, and you do what I said. Um, but what happens is people get distracted, and part of it has to do with the way your brain works. Um, but I've gotten to the point where when people get to the place where they are actually focused, I know I can't get them. I can actually look into the audience and I can tell there are people that I will not be able to get because they just have that, they're in the zone. They've got that calmness about them. And I know that they are now completely locked in. And it's a beautiful thing to see when it actually happens. But focus is not something that you add, not something you do. Focus is about subtraction. Focus is about removing things that are getting in the way of you being able to do the task at hand, right?
Such an
So,
important, you just said something really important. It's about taking things away, not adding. And so much of when we're talking about developing people, they think about, well, you got to add stuff to it when really it's about getting rid of the wrong stuff so
yep,
that you can see what's really needed.
yep. Simon Says is very simple. You know, riding a bike is very simple. Doing the stuff I do here at work is complicated, but the individual tasks themselves might not be quite as complicated, right? And when you talked about the building blocks I use when doing Simon Says, I mean, that's the way we build up technical instruments for NASA as well. It's not, they're so complicated, you can't even take in all at once like what you're supposed to do. So you start with building blocks, right? My Simon Says game is not rehearsed, right? It's the 15 or 20 minutes is not rehearsed. It's just taking these simple building blocks and using them in different combinations and using them over and over again, and also reacting to what's happening from the audience, right? If it doesn't make sense for me to keep things at a simple level if I see that the audience is more advanced, right? So it's sort of reacting to what you're seeing, but also there's a part of the game where it gets dramatically more difficult. I throw a curveball that people don't expect. And usually I will repeat that thing over and over and over again until everybody gets it, because I want everybody to make that leap, right? And sometimes it takes a while, like the simplest command over and over and over again. Sometimes it takes people 3 or 4 or 5 tries to get it right, but I always allow for that repetition so that they can say, oh, now I know how to do this because I've done it successfully once. Doesn't mean they're going to do it successfully from there on out, but at least they have that sense of success before moving on to the next piece. And it's the same thing when we're developing instruments here, right? We can't go on to the next piece until we've got this piece working, right? So,
So I want to get into a little bit of your origin story, your superhero. So, origin story stuff.
Yeah.
But you've talked a little bit about camps, but I want to hear more fully. How did you get here to being that person who can do both the technical and the people stuff? How'd you get here?
I like I said, I was pretty good at math and science as a kid, but my parents were people. They always are. They always have been. One of the things that, my parents are much older now. They're still both here at 86 and 84. I just visited them. They're down in Florida. I visited about a month ago. And it's just every time I go see them, it just comes back to me over and over again how kind they are to every single person they encounter. And maybe I didn't notice it in particular as a kid, but I guess I sort of knew it, or maybe I just took for granted that everybody was that way. But they're in a retirement living facility now in an apartment complex. And there's a lot of people working there. And my parents are so kind to every single person working there. They always have been, no matter where we've gone. Whenever they came here to visit me in Boulder, I'd go see them at the hotel, and they were kind to the people who made up their rooms. They were kind to the people who served them their food. They were kind to people that other people weren't usually kind to, the people who we call the help, like some people would call them the help. And it just didn't matter. I never saw my parents say a mean word to anybody, and they treat everybody like their friends. And Um, and I think I got a lot of that from them. I think I got a lot of that people stuff, that, relational stuff from them. My dad was a middle school English teacher, and I
And
remember
this
going
is in
to,
Philadelphia, correct?
this is in the southern New Jersey.
Okay. For some reason, I thought you were.
I say Philadelphia just because it's close, right?
Okay.
But yeah, and he took me to school with him, and I was maybe 6 or 7, and I remember walking the hallways with him in school, and how all the kids, middle schoolers, would always say, "Hi, Mr. Gurst, good to see you, Mr. Gurst," and how the respect he had from the students and the respect he had from his coworkers and his principal, and that kind of rubbed off on me. Like that's just the way that they were, both my mom and my dad. And so I think I got a lot of people stuff from them. And also,
Yeah.
being at summer camp, and, it kind of makes you have to be a people person because, at 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years old, you're living in a cabin with, 13 or 14 other kids who are your age and having to figure all that stuff out.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sort of gets you a little more skilled at having relationships with people because it's kind of sink or swim, right?
Yep. Yep. So being like inclined towards math and stuff, that sent you to college for electrical engineering degree.
Correct.
How was that experience?
It was great. I mean, I knew I wanted to be an engineer. I went to a school that was very good with engineering. The very first year is sort of general engineering classes, and then towards the end of your first year, that you have to pick a major. So you want to be a chemical engineer or civil engineer or electrical engineer or mechanical engineer. And I had no idea. I hadn't thought about it. And then luckily somebody on my freshman hall came to me and said, "Hey, you going to the open houses tonight?" I said, "What open houses?" They said, "Well, each engineering, discipline is having an open house. So you can go down and meet some of the students and see what they do." And I just always assumed I would be a chemical engineer because everybody said the smartest people were the chemical engineers and they made the most money. And so I just assumed that that's what I would do. And so I went to the chemical engineering open house and did not like it at all. I looked around and I thought to myself, I don't want to be sitting in a lab just mixing chemicals together for the rest of my life. And so I immediately got depressed and panicked because I didn't know what I was going to do. And my roommate said, "Hey, let's go check out the EE, electrical engineering open house." And I went there, and there were people with robots and, computery stuff. And I thought, oh, this is totally what I want to do. And so very fortunate because, if that person hadn't come to me and asked me to go to the open house, we might be having a different conversation now.
I had the I had I've got a science degree biology, but I had to take 5 quarters of chemistry and 3 of physics. My last quarter of physics, it got into electricity and all that kind of stuff. And my professor, I mean, electronics all the way. And he wrote, this was early days of computer programs. He wrote a program that would simulate circuits, and you could plug in the different aspects of a circuit and it would visually display it. He was convinced that the corporations were trying to steal his app, and he would have been totally happy to lock himself into a room and have them slide food under the door so he could program all the time.
Yep.
So that was my introduction to EE type people. I'm going, whoa, I mean, that's cool stuff, but do you gotta like lock yourself in a dark room for this? And that's why, like, when with what you do, that for everybody out there, engineers can relate to people. They are
Yes.
really cool people if you give them a chance. So don't put the engineers in a closet.
Yeah, I mean, in general, there are many of us that actually do have people skills.
Yeah.
There are some that sort of fit a little more into the stereotype. But it's kind of fun because I feel like, here at the office, I get to use my people skills even in some of our engineering meetings, and just things as simple as, and I get this from my parents, right? Is that, somebody will do something and I'll just say to them, "Hey, that was really good. Like you nailed that, right?"
Mhm.
And it's a really, really simple thing. Um, but I think it makes a difference. I think it's that, creating relationships with people, even though we don't necessarily have to, I think we work better together when we do. And so I've made a point of, And I do it all the time of trying to, remind myself to ask people about their families or about skiing or about, whatever, and pay them compliments when they do a good job and try not to place blame when things go wrong. And I do that, I bring that to my mountain biking as well. Like, so I taught skiing for a while, for
Well,
several.
tell me about, because I want to get to that, but I want to hear about your post-college career path
Okay. Yeah.
because it's kind of non-conventional, which I can relate to.
Yeah. So when I graduated, my first job was working for a company called RCA. And this was back, I caught the tail end of the period of time when engineers would basically go to work for one of these big monolithic companies and work there for 50 years and then retire. RCA, IBM, um, Sperry Univac. They were just these huge, massive companies, and they had thousands of people working for them. And so I went to work for RCA in Camden, New Jersey. Not the nicest place in the world. It was a big campus of 3 or 4 city blocks surrounded by fencing. And there was a gate that you drove through to get in, and then thousands of people would walk past the security guard and show their badge. And it was one of those kind of places. And it was military work, and I hated it. I had to wear a suit and tie. The transition from being a kid to being a grown up was very harsh for me. It's like I pretty much finished up my last year at summer camp and went home and put on a suit and tie and went to work for the first time. And we were designing the project I was on was we were working on a communication system that was designed to as a fallback communication system in the event of a nuclear holocaust. Yeah, it's a
That's
fun
kind of
project.
big. They're kind of big.
Yeah, and so it's hard working on a project that you hope never gets used. Um, and it was depressing work. It wasn't where I really wanted to be. And so after, a couple of years, I remember going to my dad and saying, I don't know what to do. I hate my job. And my dad, there's a couple of times in my life he has really surprised me, and this was one of them, because I thought for sure he would say, yeah, but you got to stick with it, man. It's your job, man. You got to go to work. This is, responsibility and whatever. And instead he said, you don't like your job? I said, no, I don't really like my job at all. He said, why don't you quit? Yeah. All right, Dad. And I said to him, really? He said, yeah, you're 25. Like, why would you continue to work at a job that you don't like? There's plenty of other jobs out there. I said, all right, I'm going to quit my job. And then he looked at me and he said, I don't care what you do, just don't do nothing. That was his
Hmm.
his words of wisdom to me. And so I actually went back and worked at summer camp that summer because my parents were there, and it was great to be able to go back there. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I found a job there, and it was great for a while. I had my first place of my own. DC was a great place to be as a young 20-something person. I had a great social life. I met a lot of people. And I worked there for about 5 years. And then all my friends that I had made started buying houses and getting married and having kids. And that's not where I was. Um, I felt like I still had other stuff I wanted to do. And the main thing I wanted to do was ski, um, because I had learned how to ski when I was 26 and I kind of got hooked on it. And Washington, D.C. isn't the best area if you're an avid skier. And so just on a whim, I moved to Vermont and I found myself a job at a ski resort. And I actually invented a job at a ski resort, essentially. Like I wanted to be a ski instructor, but I wasn't good enough. And so I interviewed at all these different places, and I just went pretty much and showed up in interviews and said, "Here's my skill set.
What do you
Is
do?
right? Is there any way you can use me?" And one of the guys I interviewed with was very prescient and saw, a diamond in the rough, I guess, and he decided to hire me. And my official title was the fun guy.
There you
That
go.
was my actual official title. Um, and so for, about 120 days, I just did fun stuff at the ski resort. I skied around in a clown suit with a bag of marshmallows under my hat, and I would give them out to the kids. I did sledding parties at night. So I, built a campfire, and Tuesdays and Thursday nights we had sledding parties where I, made big batches of hot chocolate and we'd sit around the fire. I know you're a guitar player. One of the things that we originally had talked about was that I play guitar around the campfire, but in Vermont at night it gets down to like -10. Have you ever tried to play guitar at -10 degrees?
No, it tends to really do bad things to your
Yeah, it
guitar.
doesn't go well, it doesn't do very good things to your fingers either.
Yeah.
Like you can't feel them. So that sort of went out the window. But and I did what's called lift line entertainment. And something I made up, where basically we identified like what in the ski experiences the people don't like, and pretty much it was always lift lines. And this was back in the days when they were like fixed grip double chairs that took 20 minutes to get to the top, and the lift lines were even longer than that. And so my job was to make the lift line experience better. So let's see, I took a Nerf basketball hoop and I nailed it up to a post at the front of the lift line. And this was one of the sort of the beefier Nerf basketball things. And so I tossed the ball back into the line, and people would take shots from the line. And if they made a basket, I had a little whiteboard, and I'd say, "Hey, what state are you from?" I'd say New York or New Jersey or Vermont or Massachusetts, and I'd keep score. And so the states were all competing against each other.
Mm.
And so a couple of times I would take the crossword puzzle out of the newspaper and I'd put it up on the whiteboard. I'd draw it up on the whiteboard, and then people would come and they'd say, "Give me three across," and I'd give them the clue, and they try to answer it. And if they got the answer right, I keep score. And each time people came down to the bottom of the lift line, the puzzle was more filled in. And so it was like this team building activity. People didn't even know it. They'd ski back to the lift line, and it just sort of made the time go by, right?
Just so you know, Disney had this, they came up with the same idea. A friend of mine named Craig McNair Wilson or McNair, he worked for Imagineering, and one of the things he did was basically the inline entertainment, which was like they would do drama and skits and improv because they saw the same issue
Yep.
of people don't like the lines, so let's give them something to do while they're in line.
Yep.
So you're right there with the Imagineers.
So I got paid for doing that. And the best part was that I got a ski pass. So I got to ski like 120 days, which actually gets you better. And also the other benefit was that if there was ever a group lesson and there was a spot available in the group lesson, I could take a lesson for free. So I took a lot of ski lessons with a lot of really good skiers, so that by the next season I was actually good enough to become a ski instructor, which I wound up doing for 4 seasons in Vermont, which was awesome.
Yeah. What did you do? I did that kind of. I worked with a lot of people they would chase whatever season they were in. So
Yep.
the skiers would spend summer or winter up here and then go down to Australia, New Zealand. And what did you do in between seasons?
So I had worked for a friend at his engineering company before I left for Vermont. And so he hired me as a contractor for a couple of months in the springs and falls. And so I would do 8, 10 weeks of engineering work, so to exercise my technical skills. And summers, guess where I was?
Were you in New Zealand?
Summer camp, man.
Oh, okay.
My
That
parents owned a
works.
summer camp.
That works. So
And this
tell
is
me,
back.
I'm curious, like, how did you get to Boulder? And then how did you get back into the whole rocket science stuff?
Um, so so all throughout my experience at summer camp in those last few years when I was spending the summers there again, and I had run the ropes course program, the understanding was that at some point that I would take over for my dad, right? That I was going to be in charge of the camp. That I was going to be the director of the camp. And that had always been sort of my plan A. And there came one summer, it was the summer of 1996, when my dad said to me, "I think it's time you start learning the business end." Like I had done all the fun stuff. I'd done the ropes course stuff and been a division supervisor and had, college students working for me. And so we started doing the business stuff. And the business stuff wasn't very much fun, John.
I've been that
And
side of it too.
yeah, and so I'd started a camp when I was 6, and so I knew camp as something. And my dad knew camp as something else. It was always fun for my dad too, but he, as we started talking about stuff like, you got to deal with the insurance companies, and the septic system is backed up and somebody's suing us for something. And it was just all the business stuff and not what I had in my head as summer camp. And so in July of 1996, I was faced with a sort of existential dilemma, which is the thing that I had always thought I was going to do and wind up doing, my plan A, in a course of a very short period of time, I realized I didn't want to do that. And I didn't have a plan B. And I remember going to my dad and saying, Dad, I don't think I want to do this. And he looked at me and said, I didn't think you'd want to do this. He said, I'm
Why
not
is Dad so
surprised.
smart?
I know. He said, I'm not surprised. I've been doing this for a long time and I enjoyed doing this. He said, but I didn't think you would. And he said, well, what are you gonna do? And I said, I don't know. And he said, I don't care what you do, just don't do nothing. And so it was almost right about to the day, like maybe it was the day after, I got a call from my best friend who I'd been friends with from summer camp for a really long period of time. He was working for a company called Fila in Baltimore, selling athletic clothing. And he said to me, hey, I want to call you. I just want to let you know I got transferred. I said, you got transferred? And he said, yeah, my company's opening an office in Boulder and they're transferring me to Boulder. And he started telling me about Boulder. And I hung up the phone and I was so pissed. It's like, oh man, like my life is at a dead end. And now he's got the world in front of him at his feet. And I don't know what I'm going to do. And it took me about 3 days of saying to myself, man, I wish I could just pick up and move to Boulder with him. And then on the third day, I had this thought, wait a minute, I got nothing here now.
Right.
And so I called him and I said, can I come with you? And he said, sure. And Boulder actually, I had heard a little bit about it, but it actually wound up being somewhat ideal because it has a lot of technical stuff. A lot of technology companies work here, but also the Association for Experiential Education is headquartered here. It was almost like it was the ideal city designed for me and the combination of skills that I had. So a couple of months later, I was here, and that was 1996, and I've been here ever since.
Yeah. And you're back to what your degree was.
Yes.
And you're using basically it's the way I feel is that my whole life history, work history culminates into what I'm doing right now.
Yes.
And I'm able to use the only thing I'm not using right now is that I was a scuba instructor and I'm not doing scuba anymore. Everything else
Yep.
fits into what I do.
Yep.
Although scuba actually informed a lot about how I design trainings and facilitations and certifying people. But so now, just real quick, I want to hear about this Jupiter project.
Yes, fascinating stuff. So we have built what is called a dust collector, essentially. And it looks like a trash can. It's a very expensive trash can.
And trash cans are dust collectors.
It's a round, it's a cylinder.
Receptacle.
A receptacle, yes. And
engineering speak for a can.
Yes. And the mission is called, it's heading to Europa, and the mission is called Europa Clipper. If you go to the NASA website, you can find out tons of stuff about it. And so it's heading to Jupiter, but it's not, the interest isn't in Jupiter itself. It's actually using Jupiter as an orbital assist to get to the moon Europa. And Europa is very, very interesting. So Europa is an ice-covered moon. So it's got a thick ice crust. And underneath it, there's supposedly an ocean because the core of that moon is warm. And there's a lot of interest in what's in that ocean. So the ice crust actually has holes in it and look like little volcanoes almost. They're vents. And from time to time, stuff from underneath the ice crust gets spewed out into the atmosphere around Europa. And the dust collector is actually going to ride through those plumes of ejecta and collect stuff and analyze it. So it has the capability of taking those particles and breaking them down into their composite elements and analyzing what's in there, with the idea that we're interested in finding out if there's stuff in there that could have supported life at some point. Amino acids.
So they do all the analytics are done on board and then sent back.
Yep. Yeah, it would be too expensive to try to bring the stuff back.
Yeah. I know that's what they wrestle with on Mars too, is that they get all this great data or information and they have to be very precise and limited on what they can get back.
Right. You can do a good chemical analysis of, you have one of these dust collectors. You can do a pretty good chemical analysis of what's in there.
Yeah.
And so it's a fascinating mission, and very excited to have been part of the project.
So I bet you could use that technology to kind of examine your child's room at some point.
I know what's in there.
And it scares me.
And it scares me, yes.
But all right, what I want to do is I like to wrap up with a lightning round.
Okay.
And basically, they're short questions. I want your first take on it, just a few words. And again, you reserve the right to change your mind at any time. You're not signing a lifelong contract on your answers here.
Okay. I'm
So
scared.
you ready?
I'm a little scared, yeah.
Well, first one. What is your favorite book, or in these days, favorite media to give as a gift?
There's a book that I love that I have given as gifts many times, and it's called Mastery. It's by a guy named George Leonard. And I loved the book so much that I actually flew to California to meet him because he was doing a seminar at the Esalen Institute in Big Sur. And I spent a weekend with him. And it was essentially, it was talking about the process of mastery in general, about how do you become a master at something. And it's a very, very simple book, and it's beautiful in its simplicity, and it really resonates. And so if I were going to give you a book, that's the one I would give you.
I would love that book. You ever heard of the book, The Dancing Woolly Masters?
Mm-mm.
Okay, it's basically if you crashed Eastern philosophy into subatomic physics. And it's a fascinating take on all these things. It explains like all of the subatomic physics and all that ethereal stuff through Eastern thought. So that it was just a wild and crazy book. So next question. I used to just ask, who are your heroes? What I found these days is it's really hard for people to say one hero. So I say, if you are going to assemble a hero like you're assembling one of your gadgets, what parts would you take from who? So you get a chance to just say, I like this part of this person and this part of this person. Who would you assemble your hero from?
I probably would take most from my dad. But I want my dad with some musical ability.
What musician?
I don't know, maybe like Stevie Wonder.
Ooh.
Or Bruce Springsteen, maybe a combination of the two. Like the songwriting of Bruce Springsteen with the voice of Stevie Wonder. I don't know.
Cool.
I actually bumped into Stevie Wonder once. Not actually bumped into him, but I came really close. I don't get starstruck very much, like especially with like movie stars, because I kind of feel like what musicians do feels to me more important than what movie stars do. I feel like movie stars pretend to be somebody else, and musicians actually create something from nothing that changes our lives.
Or at least they used to.
Yes, maybe they used to.
Yeah.
So I remember I was on the way to St. Martin, and we had a layover in Washington, D.C., and got off the plane at National Airport. And they have one of those trains that you take from one place to the other. And it was midnight, and we had a layover at about midnight. And Mickey and I got on the train, and I turned around, and Stevie Wonder, sorry, it was standing like 2 feet away from me. And when he travels, he doesn't wear like sweatshirt and sweatpants. He travels as Stevie Wonder. Like he was in the full thing with his people who were his helpers and whatever. And I turned around, I turned back at Mickey, and I looked at her, and she said, "Don't say anything." I was like, "That's Stevie Wonder." She said, "You behave yourself. Don't go being a fanboy." Because she had never seen me do that before with anybody.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so like we got off the train, and I wanted so much to like take a picture or say something, and I didn't. And we walked away, we went our separate directions, and she said, "What was up with you?" And I was like, "Do you know what that guy has experienced? Like the
Yeah.
people who he's worked with,
Right.
the whole Motown, like it was just." And for the next half hour, I just sort of went on and on about Stevie Wonder.
Songs in the Key of Life is just a masterpiece. It's amazing.
It just everything that he has created that has infused and bettered so many people's lives, and I was standing right next to him.
Yeah.
I behaved myself.
Yeah. One more question, and it's what is one thing you've rethought or changed your mind about recently?
Rethought or changed my mind about recently. Um, you know, I've recently experienced in the last year my parents diminishing, getting older. And I have now made that transition that I know a lot of listeners probably can identify with, where you now become the parent of your parents. And it has changed my perspective a lot on a lot of things. Um, in some ways, made me a little more grounded, but also maybe a little more realistic in the sense that, here are these people that used to be such pillars of strength and who I leaned on and relied on. And, and now it's sort of the other way around. And the reality is that's going to happen to all of us at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah.
And
I
so
think
it's, yeah,
for people who are listening, that is, I think the sooner that you realize that,
yeah,
and just rethink your relationship with your parents as an adult and how you interact with them. Man, that's such an important thing. There's a couple of things that you've said in our conversation, I think that a lot of people need to listen to. One is like, if you don't like your job, what your dad said, why don't you quit? Just don't do nothing.
right.
And that happened a couple of times in your life. And there's so many people right now that I think are languishing in something they really don't love or like because they have a perspective of how their livelihood is supposed to come about. And I think you broke that.
So, yeah, so I'll leave you with this is sort of my overarching, if I were to be able to give advice to people, and I only had like a minute to do it, I would say there's three things you got to figure out in your life. What do you want to do? Like, what do you want to make your life's work? Where do you want to live? Like, what part of the world, what, country, what city, what kind of place? And who do you want to spend your time with, right? Do you want to have a partner, and what kind of person is that person? And I feel like I'm very fortunate. I've sort of got all three. It's hard to get all three, but I feel like I've got all three. And it's not all perfect all the time. But my feeling is, so with respect to work, or with respect to a partner, or with respect to where you're living, is if you don't like it, like every additional moment you spend there is wasted time. Like if you're in a relationship and it's not working for you, every additional moment you spend there is wasted time, and it's preventing you from finding what you really want. If you're not living in a place that you like to live, move somewhere else. If you don't have a job that you like, do something else. Doesn't mean necessarily run out and quit your job tomorrow, but start looking. Like start
Yeah.
entertaining thoughts about what would I like to do instead, and how would I go about making that happen? Because life is short, man.
Well, and I would also encourage people in the realm of advice of it, when you realize you don't like something, something has to change. It might be the condition or it might be you. And asking the question, how can I find myself in this town, in this relationship, in this job? How can I find myself there rather than just assume that I've got it right this time? But yeah, that's great words. So Scott, thank you for the conversation. I loved all the stuff that we have to do. And I like what you were saying before we went on is that we could probably have this conversation for about 4 hours.
Absolutely.
And it'd be great for you and me, but I don't think too many people would join us on that journey.
No,
So,
hopefully it's been interesting for more than
oh,
just you and me.
I'm sure it has been. So thank you for being here. And I look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you, John. I really feel blessed to have made your acquaintance, and I feel honored to be part of this podcast.
Be present and kind as you do great things.